Welcome to the Fabulous 413. I'm Khalees Smith.
And I'm Monty Belmonte. We're going out to the ball game later in the show as it's opening day. And in honor of that, we'll hear the story of the first woman to play in the Negro Leagues, Toni Stone, with local author and professor Martha Ackmann, who's written a book about Toni Stone's life and career.
We'll get a peek at a program that will air on NEPM Classical this weekend featuring Holyoke's own MIFA Victory Players and a little-known poet named Emily Dickenson with MIFA's artistic director, Don Sanders.
We'll double our pleasure and fun with our resident wordster and senior editor at Merriam-Webster, Emily Brewster, by looking at the storied lexicon of the word ditto.
And troubled times and offices ahoy for our weekly chat with our local congressman, methinks.
You in Worcester?
I am in Worcester, yeah.
Got any big Easter plans?
You know, my mother's in Florida. I mean, I think we're going to my sister's house for Easter. It could be pretty low-key.
That's what I kind of like about Easter.
What are you doing? You doing anything? You sticking around? Or
sticking around at Turner's. My grandmother used to make gnocchi on Easter, but it's too labor-intensive, so I've started making carbonara for Easter.
Oh, good.
Yeah, a little extra cholesterol for the holiday there.
Good.
Time for our weekly check-in with U.S. Congressman from the 2nd Congressional District of Massachusetts, and the ranking member of the Rules Committee, Worcester's own Congressman Jim McGovern. Right after we spoke last week, basically, Congressman, a press release went out from the folks who were occupying your office between March 12th and March 15th. Congressman McGovern called on to return campaign contributions from donors profiting from Israel's assault in Gaza and the West Bank. 6 River Valley peace advocates who occupied Congressman McGovern's office, pressing him to be more outspoken for a Gaza ceasefire and to call for an unconditional halt to arms shipments. They go down a list of some of the contributors to your campaign previously that are involved in weapons and arms, including Bradley Tusk, the owner of Tusk Holdings, Cassidy and Associates, BAE Systems. What was your response to this letter from the River Valley peace advocates who had previously been occupying your office?
It was give me a break. And I mean, really, some of these people that they put into this category are people I've worked with on voting rights, people I've worked with on healthcare issues. I can go right down the list. They attacked J Street, which is a progressive organization that is dedicated to a two-state solution that has called for a ceasefire. They're somehow bad people. Give me a break. We all have to focus in on what our goal here is. And our goal ought to be to get a ceasefire, to get humanitarian aid into Gaza on scale, to get the hostages released, and to get on a track to the two-state solution. But this my way or the highway, or you got to be 1,000% pure on every single thing or forget about it, I'm going to tell you, I think it's counterproductive. I think it's one of the reasons why they're not persuading more people to come on the side of an immediate ceasefire. We're losing our ability to speak to one another and to talk to one another sensibly. And good people can have a very different opinion than I do on how to deal with the crisis in between Israel and Gaza. If I want to get them to come on my side, I think I have to try to convince them and not shout them down, not stick a phone in their face, and then take their quotes and chop them up and put them online so that they're distorted. We need to get back to the business of persuasion, and I think that is the most effective activism. I'm heartbroken by what's happening in Gaza. I have called on the president, to use all of his levers to get a ceasefire. I have told him that he needs to suspend U.S. military assistance to Israel because they are in violation of our own laws, which say that if a country is frustrating the delivery of humanitarian aid, then they are ineligible for U.S. military aid. I will continue to speak out, but I would like to have people trying to persuade and not just intimidate those who disagree with them.
Yesterday at Smith College, there was a walkout in a similar vein about divestment. Do you feel that if it weren't for these larger actions and these larger calls, like River Valley protesters have done, that those big asks lead to incremental gains and is all part of the overall movement to bring peace to a situation like this? It was very effective with South Africa, calls for divestment there. Is this just part of the overall solution, and there are different places on the spectrum, all of which have an important role?
There absolutely are, but I was part of the effort to get us to change our policy toward South Africa and against apartheid. My first arrest was in front of the South African embassy in Washington, D.C. I got arrested with the Reverend William Sloan Coffin. But as we were getting arrested, we issued a statement. We talked about the reasons why we wanted to do this, and we talked about the actions that we need to take in Congress. But, I'm giving you an example. I had Hakeem Jeffries in Worcester the other day, and we visited with black leaders, and we visited a food pantry in Worcester. He also, was a guest on one of my fundraisers. So we had a group of protesters come in and just shout So I said to him, would you be willing to actually take 5 minutes or 10 minutes after this and let's hear these guys out? He said, absolutely. So I said, can we suspend? And, and I will guarantee you that you'll have some private time with the person who I hope is the next Speaker of the House. Not interested. And I just think kind of dismissing opportunities like that, I think that's a missed opportunity. Hakeem Jeffries is a good, decent, honorable man. He cares about this stuff too. And he's trying to figure out a way to get the president to move in a different direction. Maybe a conversation, would be helpful for him, like to hear from some of these people. And I guess that's what I'm simply saying. To say to me that, people that I've worked with on voting rights issues, who have contributed to my campaign, you should not take a contribution from them because somehow, if we draw a bunch of lines, they're connected to Israel somehow or supporting Israel. I'm really, that's to me a waste of time. We need to get people to change their minds, and we need to get people to start looking toward a way to get stuff done. I think everybody, and myself included, we have to kind of reassess what we've been doing because we're not making as much progress as I think we should at this point, given the gravity of the situation. Everybody has different roles. I'm just simply saying that all of us, and me, myself included, and the role I have to figure out ways to be, not just say the right thing, but actually move the ball so that actually it's making a difference for the people who are really suffering on the ground. And those are the people in Gaza right now.
Speaking with U.S. Congressman Jim McGovern, McGoverning with McGovern, you did mention how the Democratic leader of the House, Hakeem Jeffries, came to your district into Worcester. I know that you were talking things like protecting the right to vote, fighting for racial justice, and more. Tell us what the impressions were of Representative Jeffries in the 2nd Congressional District of Massachusetts. What were some of the takeaways you heard from him?
I think what he believes is that there's a lot of good stuff that we can do if we have control of the House of Representatives. A lot of stuff we can do in terms of protecting voting rights, in terms of protecting civil rights, in terms of transparency and accountability with regard to policing. We talked to black leaders in our community in Worcester who are frustrated that a lot of the federal money that goes to the state or to the city never gets to them or to their organizations. It always goes to the bigger established organizations that have a different agenda and a different set of priorities. How do we change that? So we had a very, very good conversation. And look, we have problems in this country, and racism continues to be a problem in this country, whether people want to admit it or not. And it's only getting worse with Trump running for president. I thought it was a very, very good meeting. We also stopped at a food pantry in Worcester, and he got to talk to the people who work there and talk to some of the clients and talk about their realities and how we need to do more in the area of fighting hunger and making sure people are not food insecure. So it was overall I thought a very, very good meeting. And it's important that we have these meetings because when he's speaker, he doesn't know everything, right? I mean, it's important that he hears people who are on the ground, who are doing important work to help inform him of stuff he ought to be fighting for if and when he is Speaker of the House.
Speaking of hunger, you joined UMass Chancellor Reyes and got an update on their on-campus anti-hunger initiatives, as well as checking out some of the new technologies that they're developing at UMass Amherst in their robotics department. Let's start with hunger. What were some of the interesting things you learned from Chancellor Reyes about hunger initiatives on campus at that city within a city that is UMass Amherst?
Well, first of all, I appreciate the time that Chancellor Reyes gave us and the attention to this subject. I also want to praise the students because the reason why we were all around that table was because of the students who have been advocating for a pantry and the on campus and more attention to those students who don't have a meal plan or who are food insecure. And so we talked about a number of things that can be done. Collaborations with the food bank and with Amherst Survival Center as well. It was a really good meeting, and I think it's going to produce some results, in the near term. But the fact that he gathered us all there together, with the students, with representatives from the food bank and the Amherst Survival Center, all of his top, administrators, and said this is a priority. And we want to work with you to get this stuff done, I think was a really good sign. I thought it was a great meeting. And again, these students, when I sat there and watched them grill the administration, I said to the chancellor, I said, I don't worry about the future. If these are our future leaders, we're in good shape.
What about robots? Did you see any cool robot technology being developed?
I did. I felt like I was in Star Wars. I felt like I was in Star Wars. It was unbelievable.
What do they have?
They have an incredible robotics program that, they're perfecting these robots. They can transport materials. We talked about whether at some point we could get this technology perfected so that it could actually transport humanitarian aid into very difficult places and places that are violent. We saw a robot carrying water. We saw a robot that could do a backflip. So there's a lot of great stuff happening there. And they're working with the government and with industry, to kind of perfect this technology so that it actually can be used to do good things in the future. And I'm part of the robotics caucus in Congress. And
That's so cool.
And I said to them, I want to work with them to highlight some of the stuff they're doing with my colleagues. So that's something we'll do in the future.
Congressman McGovern, I'm always scanning your social media and looking at the comments on it. And
oh my God, no!
There are people from the very far left that are very critical of you. There are people from the very far right that are critical of you. But I thought, in a Christ-like manner, this Easter week, I would draw the attention to the listeners of someone on Twitter named Anne, who describes himself as a children's librarian who reads books and know things, a lover of adventure, college hoops, and Stanley Tucci is how they describe themselves on Twitter. They also added well-rounded smartass, which I loved. They tweeted yesterday, witnessing kindness on my way to work this morning, saw my Congressman McGovern bringing a hot coffee to the gentleman that stands with his donation sign on the West Boylston Street median. Tell me about, did you realize you were being spotted? And tell me about that person that you brought coffee to.
No, at first I didn't. I didn't even see that tweet, but I didn't know I was being spotted. And no, this is a gentleman who's there quite often, and he's having a tough time. And so I usually when I get my newspapers in the morning, you get him a coffee or give him some money so he can get some food. But that's very nice of her to tweet. But it just reminds you that people are watching no matter where you are. So, but that is actually nice because I try not to look too closely at some of my social media stuff because it gets pretty brutal.
The best piece of advice that I think I ever got from Rachel Maddow was never ever read the comments, no matter what.
But this elderly gentleman, is a reminder that there are a lot of people in this country who are in deep pain and trouble and are struggling just to get food. And this guy, he's living in an apartment, can't afford his heating bill, and we're trying to work with him on that. But, there are a lot of people who struggle, and we can't take our eye off the ball. We need to refocus this country on helping improve the lives of everybody, not just the people at the top, not just the corporations, but, people who are struggling in poverty and working people who are, again, as you know, we have a lot of working people in this country who are on SNAP, who are food insecure, who don't know where the next meal is going to come from. We know what to do. We have the food. We have the money. Hunger is a political condition. We can solve it. That has to be a priority. But that is a very nice. I will see if I can track it down. I don't know who she is, but that's a very nice.
She tagged you in it, so it should be easy enough to find.
Okay, I will look for it.
U.S. Congress.
I'm not that bad. See, some people like.
You're not all bad.
I'm going to share that with my wife. Maybe she'll like me.
Yeah. U.S. Congressman from the 2nd Congressional District of Massachusetts, Congressman Jim McGovern. You can send questions for the Congressman. We talk every Thursday to thefab413@nepm.org. Thanks as always.
All the best. Thanks.
On the way, making one's own equity of sorts in baseball as we hear the story of second baseman Tony Stone with the author of the book Curveball, Martha Ackmann.
And a match made in the Bay State as the MIFA Players join Amy Beach's music and Emily Dickenson on NEPM Classical this weekend. But first, we do it again.
And by it, we mean talk to word nerd Emily Brewster about duplication and the history of the word ditto.
You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM. Emily Brewster, resident wordster from Merriam-Webster, our dictionary in Springfield, Massachusetts. There's a famous way to say I love you without saying I love you from a movie starring Patrick Swayze, Demi Moore, and Whoopi Goldberg. And that word is the word we're going to talk about today, ditto.
I had completely forgotten that this word played that role in that movie.
You don't think about Patrick Swayze and Ghost?
It's the whole way that she could tell that he was the ghost.
Tell her I love her.
He says he loves you. Sam would never say that.
Ditto. Tell her ditto.
That was ditto. Ditto.
Right. The only thing that stuck with me really was the pottery scene.
Oh, no. I hope it wasn't a masterpiece.
Is this a movie I should revisit?
I haven't seen it in a long time, but I would like to revisit it now. I remember loving it when it came out.
Whoopi Goldberg is still the best part of that whole movie.
She was awesome.
Would you stop rambling?
I don't think I'm rambling. I'm just answering a question. He's got an attitude now.
I don't have an attitude.
Yes, you do have an attitude.
She is
I
awesome.
thought the pottery was the best part.
It's just one
it's
small
just
scene, yeah.
Clay everywhere.
Yeah.
Well, I'm partial to pottery. I guess that's the thing.
I'm crazy for Swayze, too. I love him.
All right, right. So ditto. Ditto plays an important role in that movie. But the word ditto itself is the topic of our conversation today.
Mm-hmm.
Is this a word that either of you use?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, in what context?
If I'm dead and I want to tell my wife that I love her.
Oh my God.
I love you, Mother. I've always loved you.
Ditto.
No, like usually to corroborate, like in my standard lexicon, it basically means the same as like seconded, like, or I agree, I'm doing the same thing.
Yeah. I might say
repeating
same,
this.
or I might say I second that emotion, which I say a lot, too.
Yeah, but I say ditto.
It's useful, and it used to have a much broader use than that. So the story behind it is kind of interesting, which is why I thought it'd be fun to talk about. Do you have a guess that we borrowed it from a particular language? Do you have a guess of which language we borrowed ditto from?
I feel like it's probably Latin.
I'm going to guess computer language, and it has to do with photocopying or something.
I mean, it does have to do with photocopying, but
Well, Khalees, you are closer. It's not from Latin, but it is from Italian. But it does have its origin in Latin, the word dicere, meaning to say, which is the same root of the word dictate, dictation. It was in the 17th century that English speakers noticed this Italianism. Italians would use ditto to refer to something that had been previously mentioned. So, so-and-so ordered spaghetti, ditto so-and-so else. That's closer to how we use it. It was first used, in Italian, they used it as a noun. English speakers borrowed it and started doing all kinds of reckless things with it.
as we are wont to do with language in general.
Yeah.
Exactly. So we adopted it as a noun, and then we started using it as an adjective, a ditto plate of spaghetti. I have no idea if people are actually talking about spaghetti like this. This is just me being culturally, I don't know, fixated on Italian food, because I do love it. So
Somebody turned the ditto machine on in here while we were in the middle of talking. I was like, what is that hum? Somebody's printing something. It's a ghost. It's Patrick Swayze.
If only.
Anyway, somebody's going to come looking for that ditto shortly, I'm sure. Sorry, continue, please.
So we had noun use, we shoved it into adjectival categories, and then we started using it also as an adverb and as a verb. Very useful word, applied in all these different things. There aren't that many English words that get to do all those different things, that get to be nouns, verbs, adjectives, and adverb.
The F word is one of them, though, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
That
hard
is
to
also
use
an
the F word as
extremely
an
versatile word.
As an adverb, but pretty much everything else you can do.
Yeah, but this one doesn't offend people.
No, it doesn't.
The other thing is that its noun use is actually somewhat, and maybe even more properly, understood as pronoun use, because it stands for a referent. It stands in the place of a proper noun.
Cool.
I wouldn't think of it as a pronoun like that, but I guess that makes sense.
Yeah. When we start to look at evidence of it being used, we've got this example from the late 18th century in the Natural History of British Insects. There's an illustration, and it says this illustration is identified as the natural size of the larva with its manner of feeding. And then the second is as magnified appearance of the upper side of ditto. So that's kind of shows you what typical use was like. It's saying there's this one thing, and then this other thing is a different version of the same.
And that's what I think of it as, but I wouldn't have thought of that as a pronoun, but I guess you can make an argument that it is.
Yeah, because it's standing in the place of something, and the referent is understood as being a particular thing. Then it was in the 19th century that, and this was the first thing that really surprised me about it, I was looking at some 19th century literature and seeing the word ditto. There's a surprising amount. Ditto is used in popular fiction of the 19th century in a way that is pretty unfamiliar to us now. I'm going to read you a few examples, okay? Here is Charles Dickens from Sketches by Boz, 1836. Mr. Thomas Potter then was a clerk in the city, and Mr. Robert Smithers was a ditto in the same.
Huh.
Isn't that wild? The rest of it is, they lived in the same street, walked into town every morning at the same hour, dined at the same slap bang every day, and reveled in each other's company every night.
What is a slap bang?
I know.
We
This
can't
is
talk
why I
about
had to
that on the
complete the
radio.
quotation. Yeah. It's an eating establishment where you slap your money down and then they give you food. It's not a nice, fine restaurant where they have faith in your ability to pay after you've been served.
It's a diner? It's like a fast food joint.
Yes, but in 1836. All right, this one, Charlotte Bronte. Is that how you say her name? Somebody corrected me once, and I still
Some
don't remember.
people
It's
say
Bronte
Bronte,
or
I
yeah.
thought it was Bronte.
It's Brontosaurus.
Charlotte Brontesaurus in the novel Shirley, 1849. What has Mr. Sweeting besides his curacy? This question seemed to tickle Malone amazingly. He laughed for full 3 minutes before he answered it. What has Sweeting? Why, David has his harp or flute. He has a sort of pinchbeck watch, ditto ring, ditto eyeglass. That's what he has.
So it's being used as same there, too?
Yeah, I'll do just one more. This is from Moby Dick, 1851. That now is what old Bowditch in his epitome calls the zodiac and what my almanac below calls ditto. So again, using it always to mean, in these cases, using ditto to mean the same. And that use has fallen out, right? We do not use the word in that way anymore. And I don't know why.
Yeah, our version of same almost means like I agree with you as opposed to I have the same thing or they have the same thing.
The exact replica. It's not, yeah.
Right. That use is pretty new, though. It's almost like it stands in for a complete clause. This instead is just the one phrase, but I do wonder why it went away. Because it went away. The ditto marks, you're familiar with ditto marks, inverted commas or apostrophes, like two of them.
Yes.
Those date to the 19th century, from what I can tell. It's possible that they're older than that. But
I use those a lot if I'm writing.
Yes.
You do? Yeah. And do you call them ditto marks?
I probably wouldn't.
No.
But I would know that that's what it meant.
Yes.
So then in the 20th century, we start to see verb use. And the verb use also, I think, is interesting. James Joyce, Ulysses, 1922. The temperaments at the door, Stephen interposed with, were very passionate about 10 shillings. Roberto, Ruba, Roba, Sua. Quite so, Mr. Bloom dittoed.
So that's like agreed with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When it changes to the verb form, it's coming closer to the way that we use it more commonly now.
Yeah, it does. But we don't use it as a verb.
Right.
Right? Or do you? Do you ever say, I ditto you, or I ditto that?
No.
The verb use is basically gone from American English and British English now, but it does exist in other places. In India, for example, that verb use of ditto is still relatively common in Indian English. But the others are basically gone, except for the adverbial ones, which is basically what we're all familiar with. Here are some other examples of it. This is from New England Monthly, 1987. On my knees, I was scrubbing teak bright into my decks and flushing them clean with sweat. My knees, as usual, were bleeding. My fingers ditto. So my fingers also were bleeding. At some point in the 20th century, I think it was the beginning decades of the 20th century, there was a company called the Starkey Chemical Process Company of LaGrange, Illinois. They had a trademark for the word ditto. The trademark was applied to their copier machines. These were duplicating machines. It's a great name for a kind of machine that duplicates, given the word's meaning.
For sure.
Yes.
Ditto machines existed before there were photocopiers. Did you ever have ditto machines in your school?
Yes. You were the luckiest person if you were the person who got to go and use them.
What were they called again? We didn't call them ditto machines. We called them something else.
Yeah, it was something else.
Oh, really? We called them ditto machines.
Oh, man,
No,
that's going
we
to bother me
also
now.
called them ditto machines, but there was something else. I feel like it started with an M.
Mimeograph.
There we go.
I had to Google it.
For those who are unfamiliar, you could use a typewriter. You would type something onto a piece of paper that had a carbon sheet attached to it. Then when the carbon paper was removed, there was carbon on the back of the printed sheet, the master sheet. You could then feed that through a machine that was moistened with a hydrocarbon fluid, right? This is all very good for us to be inhaling deeply.
I'm sure.
Especially as children, because I only got to use this in elementary school,
right.
and you were like the special representative from the class if you got to be the person to go to the office and make the copies.
I can still smell it.
Yeah, same.
I know, the smell is I have the smell in my mind too, and I loved it.
It toxified our brains.
Yeah, it was kind of the best. And then you'd roll the paper through,
Yep.
and it'd make all the copies.
That's right. And the color ink would be a kind of beautiful purple.
Yeah.
I liked that.
shade.
I liked that too.
Yeah. So for a time, there was this new use of the verb ditto to mean to copy something on this particular kind of duplicator. So just like we Xerox things now, people were dittoing worksheets for us when we were in elementary school.
Then Xerox came around from behind them and stole the technology and the name. And
Became one of those trademark names that becomes the verb that it is.
Yeah.
And also brought with it its own piquant smell.
Yes,
Yes.
that's right. I remember the toner. My dad worked for Xerox for like the majority of my childhood. So,
really?
There's lots of photocopies of my bum.
He just sit you on the machine to test it out.
Kids these days will never know how hard it was to get up on top of that machine.
Thankfully so.
I just think this word is interesting because it's an interesting snapshot of how the language changes sometimes. These words can be adopted and applied broadly, and then they just kind of drop out of fashion. My theory, and I have no way to back this up at all, is that the duplicator machine it narrowed the appeal of the word's use. The word no longer seemed so suitable for all these other situations, and it just became about the ditto machines, but not entirely, because it does still have this other use. But it used to be so much more widely used, and then it became very narrowed. And I think now that the ditto machine is gone, it maybe has a chance for a greater resurgence.
Given how many parts of speech the word ditto is, we should return it to its original forms of all these parts of speech, like it's
You mean Italian?
an unchained melody of uses of this, because that was a big song in Ghost, remember?
Yeah.
When they're doing the pottery.
Do you ditto Monty's assertion, his
No.
sentiment?
It's an unchained melody.
Not this version of it, no. I don't encourage this song or that return. I'm going to get flack for that, but I stand by it.
Any linguistic questions for the Word Nerd, you can always email us, thefab413@nepm.org. Later in the show, we'll hear about a historical curveball in the story of second baseman Tony Stone and the local author who has returned some light to her story, Martha Ackmann.
Next, a marriage of music and litany that you can hear on NEPM Classical this weekend. We'll speak to Executive Artistic Director Don Sanders about the MIFA Victory Players program, Because I Could Not Stop, an encounter with Emily Dickenson.
You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM.
The pedigree of honey does not concern the bee. A clover any time to him is aristocracy.
Welcome back to the Fabulous 413. This Sunday, March 31st, 7 p.m. on Classical NEPM, Because I Could Not Stop, an encounter with Emily Dickenson.
Written by James Mello with the music of Amy Beach, the production features Angelica Page as Emily Dickenson, sopranos Christina Bacharach, and the MIFA Victory Players.
The production is directed by Don Sanders, MIFA Executive Artistic Director, who I had the privilege to run into in a very strange circumstance.
Do tell.
Yeah, we'll start there. I'm dressed like Ken from the Ken movie on the March for the Food Bank, and I'm at Fame, which is this cool new bar in Holyoke, for our lunch stop on the March for the Food Bank. And at noon on a Monday, a razzle-dazzle looking gentleman is sitting there drinking a glass of sparkling wine. And I said, I don't know what's up with you today, but I'm loving the life you're living right now. And it was Don Sanders from the MIFA Victory Players. Tell us why you were there drinking sparkling wine at noon on a Monday, as if anyone needs an excuse.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I didn't need one, but actually the reason was it was my birthday.
That's a great reason.
It was a great reason. It also happened to be Congressman Jim McGovern's birthday, too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that
You're
was
in good company.
It was
Absolutely. Very good company.
MIFA Victory Players. They're connected with the not yet opened Victory Theater. But tell us a little bit about the history and mission and your relationship with the
Sure.
MIFA and the Victory Theater before we
Absolutely.
talk about Emily Dickenson.
The Victory Players was engendered or thought up in 2014 when we were envisioning what the theater would do once it was opened.
Mm-hmm.
And I was working with a guy named Tim Lazinski, who was with IMG at the time, and he was assigned to do the business plan for the Victory. And
What's IMG?
IMG is International Management Group.
Okay.
The largest manager of venues in the world. They had just finished spending $694 million to open a performing arts center in, I think it was Shanghai. Anyhow, and Tim is also a Broadway producer, And I had done a show for them out in Napa and told them about the Victory Project. They were fascinated. And when we came around to having a business plan commissioned, people said, well, the best business plan would come from the biggest people in the business, and it happened to be IMG, and I happened to know them. And so I called them and I said, guess what? Would you be interested in doing this? And they said, no, actually, wait a minute, tell us a little bit more, Don, about this project. And I explained it to them that it was at the intersection of 90 and 91 in Massachusetts, et cetera. Then they suddenly remembered, oh, you directed the show in Napa. Yes, we were fascinated by that. Okay, yes. All right, we're looking. All right. Yes, we'll do it. But we'll have to send it to our gang in London because they look at everything from satellites and check it out.
Wow.
So about an hour later, they called back and said, yeah, we're going to do this. We sat down and talked about what we thought would be really exciting plans. The Victory is a 1,600-seat Broadway-sized theater. And I like to say that to listeners because that sort of, I hope, explains why we're spending all this time, money, and effort on getting it open because we don't have something like that exactly in the Valley. We've got great venues. So we sat and met in New York, and I said, one of the things I want most, in addition to a place that can be hosting Tier A Broadway shows, I want to be able to have works that can grow out of Holyoke and out of the region. So they came back with this very well worked out idea called the Victory Players, which would be the establishment of a group in Holyoke. They recommended a residency so that we could call on people from around the world, et cetera, and that they would develop music and they would become really a kind of a voice or a messenger for the Victory Theater. Well, I love the idea. That was the beginning in 2014. And the focus on the original idea of having a concept or a theme, and the first one was El Puerto Rico, the rich port. Holyoke is 51% Hispanic, Latinx, mainly Puerto Rican. So that was a perfect way to begin to think about how it could be a sound that would emanate from Holyoke and from the Victory Theater. So we started and we had the first set of concerts in 2018 and the Emily Dickenson piece. So you're thinking, what does Amy Beach have to do with El Puerto Rico?
I actually have a specific question about the connection between Amy Beach and Emily Dickenson because although there's something very evocative of the times that Emily Dickenson lived in the Valley in Amy Beach's music, and that might just be because like she's turn of 20th century female composer. There aren't a lot of those. Her main instrument is piano. There's a lot of time markers, I think, in her music, but I don't necessarily think of it in conjunction with like Emily Dickinson's work and the way that you've put it together. Why pair those two?
First of all, there still aren't enough women composers.
I mean, we don't have to. I remember more every day, but still not enough.
So the playwright for this piece, James Mello, is a musicologist at the Barry Brook Center. He paired the two because he felt that in the postmodern sense that Emily Dickinson was breaking ground in the sound of poetry. There's humor, there's a kind of parodying of Shakespearean and very romantic poetry writing. And that Amy Beach was embracing also the Romantic movement in the late 19th century, and that she was moving into, I'm not a musicologist, but sonorities and elevations of, I'm going to say spiritual, they're not necessarily religious, but spiritual sensibilities. And James was very attracted to the combination of the two.
We're speaking with Dawn Sanders, who is the Executive Artistic Director of the MIFA Victory Players. This Sunday on Classical NEPM at 7, you can hear samples of, excerpts from Because I Could Not Stop, an encounter with Emily Dickinson, what we've just been speaking about, and the creation of this Emily Dickinson-themed play from players that play for a theater that currently is not open.
Correct.
So where do these players play? Where was this recorded? Where can we see the MIFA Victory Players until such a time as this Broadway-sized theater is open in Holyoke?
Yes. So they were recorded at Holyoke Media, which is a new facility in downtown Holyoke. That was on a Friday night. So I wanted to have the artists perform in front of an audience. It's really a performance rehearsal. My experience is that no matter how wonderful performers are when we're in a rehearsal room and how excited I can be and happy with their product, they always do even better in front of people.
It's different. You get different energy from having an audience
absolutely.
there.
That's what it's about. And then on Saturday, because the Emily Dickenson Museum was one of the co-producers of this project, we did a special excerpt at the museum itself where the singer and the actress were actually in costume, and they were in Emily's parlor, and the music was played on the piano there, which is not exactly what the Dickinsons had, but it's the exact same kind of piano. Now, people on Sunday will not hear excerpts from that part, but I'm giving just an idea of how we try to, in the same way that the music in El Puerto Rico or in the Mexican-inspired music that finishes this concert coming up in June, we try to have there be additional stimulation. So being at that museum was a stimulation. It was exciting for the performers to know that they were going to be in Emily's house.
Don Sanders, who's the executive artistic director of the MIFA Victory Players, we've talked a lot about this theater and the excitement that is building around it. Where are we on the timeline of what's to come next? Do we have an anticipated timeline of when we could go see a big Broadway-style show in Holyoke?
You have asked the question that I wake up screaming. Asking myself, incriminating myself. So work began.
Wake up and when is painted on your ceiling?
So the answer at the moment, and I always say this, I'm willing to take the heat for making these predictions. That's what I'm supposed to do. We're out there with the gang raising money. The contractors are the same contractors that have been working on this since 2010, the architects. I think that we're looking at 2025. I think we're in the last phase. If you were to drive by the theater today, you wouldn't see that any work is going on, but most of the work that began in November is happening inside the theater. And I also have to say, everything has to do with money, and it's 1,600 seats. I mean, hold on to your headsets. It's a $61 million project. We're not just raising money.
Bases are being made.
Yeah. That's a lot of money.
Tremendous progress. And, we are now in March of 2024, and I think the construction is 2 years. It's a historic restoration, very complicated. So 2 years from, let's just call it that it began on December 1, 2023. And I think that's where we're going to be looking at some kind of, I hope, soft opening.
I love it.
And I'd love to have you come over anytime and see it. I mean, it's very important to see it. Boy, you walk in there and people who think Don is crazy or what is going on here, and they get it immediately because behind that facade, which has been boarded up since 1979, is just this amazing theater. It's been a really long journey. That's another show. But, but I want to assure people work has begun and it will open.
Don Sanders is the executive artistic director of the MIFA Victory Players. You can hear selections from Because I Could Not Stop, an encounter with Emily Dickenson this Sunday at 7 p.m. on Classical NEPM. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Up next, it's opening day. We'll talk about equalizing the playing field, the baseball playing field, with author and professor Martha Ackmann and the career of Tony Stone.
You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM.
The Fabulous 413 podcast is funded by Northeast Solar, helping customers make the switch to solar for savings, energy security, and tax incentives. Learn more at northeast-solar.com.
Welcome back to the Fabulous 413. I'm Monty Belmonte.
And I'm Cleve Smith.
And it's opening day for baseball. I have low hopes for the Red Sox, but hope springs eternal on opening day. Maybe I'll even stay up until 10:10 for a start tonight on the West Coast.
Is it like that thing where they post after the Super Bowl where they're like, tomorrow we're all undefeated?
Exactly. I like that. Wait till next year, the Doris Kearns Goodwin book all about baseball. It's a good mantra to have. Joining us to talk about a fascinating historical baseball story is Martha Ackmann. Martha loves to tell dynamic stories
stories of American women who've broken barriers, fought against the status quo, dreamed big dreams, and changed America.
Her essays have appeared in The Atlantic, Paris Review, The New York Times, The Washington Post. She's also a frequent commenter for us here at New England Public Media and has been featured on places like CNN, NPR, and the BBC.
She's the author of The Mercury 13, the true story of 13 women and the dream of spaceflight.
Which is where we first met, and that is a fascinating story, too. But more specifically, in honor of the beginning of the baseball season today, Martha is the author of Curveball, the remarkable story of Toni Stone, the first woman to play professional baseball in the Negro League. You've also written a book about Emily Dickenson, which we were just talking about, but we will skip that for now. Introduce us to Toni Stone.
Toni was the first woman to play professional baseball in the Negro League.
Or in the Negro League?
It depends on what you mean by play.
Aha, okay.
So there were women who were kind of used as stunts who came in and played an inning. Or I think the one woman got did something with Babe Ruth in the majors. But Toni was the first real professional. I mean, to not only take it seriously, but to also be taken seriously. Her dates are 1921, 1996, and she started playing in Minnesota in sort of semi-pro leagues, moved to the Oakland area and played in more advanced leagues there than the New Orleans Creoles, which were kind of the minor leagues of the Negro Leagues. And then finally, in 1953, she got a call from the owner of the Indianapolis Clowns.
I love that name.
And clowning had a very central role in the Negro Leagues. And kind of the seventh inning stretch. There would be lots of fastballs tossed from one player to the other. Had a little bit of a minstrel quality to it.
So maybe not as cool as I initially thought. I was just I love clowns.
But minstrelry has an interesting and very specific, useful and interesting place in Black history.
Yeah.
So we can't discount it entirely, but it is interesting that it comes from that tradition.
Yeah. I mean, they knew that baseball was entertainment and sports. It's something that I always think about when talking about that clowning aspect of it. Was Willie Mays, who started in the Negro Leagues, always played with a hat that was one size too large. So that when he hit a single and he was rounding first and going on into second, running as fast as he could, the hat would fly off.
Oh, that's amazing.
And it looked like he was going so fast. and it was all just part of that game.
It continues with the Savannah Bananas, which I hope you've heard of. Have you seen them? They're they're a minor league team. They have all these dance routines. They are a delight to watch. So
Well, you're right. There is more of that in minor league play, and of course, the corollary, people think of the Harlem Globetrotters,
right?
Who were such phenomenal athletes, but also understood that clowning. So in 1954, she was signed to the Indianapolis Clowns, and the reason for it is an interesting one. It had to do with the demise of opening the doors with integration. 1947, Jackie Robinson integrates baseball, Major League Baseball. And at that point, the minor leagues began to go downhill because people were watching Jackie and Larry Doby and all of those players. And so the white owner of the Indianapolis Clowns, a guy who was always taking risks, quite a showman himself, said, I wonder what would happen if we brought a woman into play. And so Toni was by far the best woman who was knocking around, pretty much the only woman to be knocking around the Negro League. So he brought her in, and he said, if she's no good, people will come and see her once. But if she's good, they'll come back. So some baseball historians say that she carried the Negro Leagues on her back for the next 2 years because she was such a phenomenal player. One point in the 53 season, she was batting .364, I think, behind Ernie Banks.
Wow. And I mean, this is worth noting that, if we're talking about this female baseball player, Toni Stone, this wasn't a league of their own. She was playing amongst men the lone woman amongst men playing
all
on
the
these.
time.
Yeah.
All the time.
And who she replaced on the Indianapolis Clowns is also fascinating.
This young guy named Henry Aaron.
Never heard of him.
Never heard of him. Never heard of him. He was a skinny kid. He used to say people called him 6 o'clock because he was so skinny. He looked like the hour
time
hand.
on the clock at 6 o'clock.
The time on the clock. So he went, believe it or not, to the Boston Braves in the majors. Never played for them, but he was a second baseman at that time. He was playing second, and so Toni came in to play second, and she was good on the pivot. She could make a double play, and she didn't bat .364 the whole time, not by any stretch, just for one little spurt. But she batted to about .250, which today
That's pretty good.
That's pretty good. That would give you several millions, I would think. So she was not a flash in the pan, and people did come to see her play. She also got a lot of flack. Including from players on her own team and other teams who other teams would or players on her own team would throw the ball at second so that she would be positioned in such a way to take a kind of a spikes up slide into second. They're trying to get her injured. And fans would yell out famously, why don't you go home and fix your husband some biscuits? It was by no means an easy stretch. Although she did talk about how, this always moves me, she talked about how women in particular would come to meet her after the game when they were kind of packing up. And they didn't want her autograph. They wanted to touch her. They couldn't believe that she was real. And Negro League teams at this time had to rent out the white Major League ballparks. So imagine the sight of this woman running out to second base at Yankee Stadium. I mean,
that's amazing.
You could understand why people didn't quite believe she was real.
Yeah. You mentioned like her talking about her story, and one of the things you mentioned in the early pages of Curveball is how she becomes over the years reticent to tell her story because of the way that she's painted and other people's telling of what happened to her. Can you talk about like why or like what people would end up portraying her as and who she ended up opening up to?
Well, they portrayed her in two ways. One as this oddball, this odd girl who wanted to play sports, who wanted to play professionally. Even her family, they were quite supportive of her. But they couldn't see how she was going to make a living doing this.
Her mom tried to get her into figure skating.
And she was good at everything. I remember one thing that I was impressed by. She was even the best player on the block with Red Rover. She was the best. She was the best. Rover said, that game. So she didn't want to be portrayed as an oddball. This was serious to her. This was who she was. I sometimes get teased because I write about such diverse subjects, from astronauts to Emily Dickenson to baseball players. But I think the through line with all of that is that I'm intrigued by, I'm awed by women who know their own minds. And she knew her own mind. So this was not a gimmick for her. And the other way they portrayed her was as baseball player by day, lady by night.
Oh, no.
So there would be pictures of her in some of the black press sitting in front of a dressing table, getting her makeup right and going out on the town, stepping out of the car in a very frilly skirt. And that obviously wasn't Toni either. She wasn't the oddball. She wasn't the woman who put on makeup to play. In fact, she refused. The League of Their Own, women had to play in these short skirts, which was terrible because they couldn't slide. They'd get injured. And they wanted Toni to do that. And that's where she drew the line. She said, absolutely not.
We're speaking about Toni Stone with Martha Ackmann, Valley author who's written a book called Curveball. That book has been turned into a stage play, and that stage play will have its Connecticut debut at the end of May into the middle of June at Playhouse on the Park. It's called Tony Stone. It's an original play by Lydia R. Diamond, and its Connecticut premiere is coming right up. You got any we have seconds left, but any high hopes for your Red Sox, which you're wearing a pin about today?
I'm wearing a pin today because I'm hopeful. I am hopeful. No, I'm hoping. I'm hoping for a good fourth place finish.
Yes. As long as we're not the bottom of the barrel another year.
Keeping your hopes reasonable.
Yeah, I love that. Well, thank you so much for letting us know about this incredible historical figure, Tony Stone.
This Sunday, March 31st, is the International Trans Day of Visibility.
But we don't have a show on Sunday, so tomorrow on the Fabulous 413, we'll chat with folks from Translate Gender about their work and the resource and art fair they're having at 33 Holly in Northampton.
We'll have live music from the Balkan-inspired cavalcade that is Bella's Bartok before their show at the Drake on Saturday.
And we're pitting north against south, but in Italy's glass this time with the folks from Provisions in Long Meadow.
I'm Khalees Smith.
I'm Monty Belmonte.
We'll see you tomorrow on the Fabulous 413.